I can still remember walking out of the cinema with my friend after watching Star Wars Episode 2 Attack the Clones for the first time, and the both of us just being in total silence until we reached my car. Out of all the ways George Lucas had again destroyed his own franchise, the thing that stuck in my head the most was the way they explained the origins of the clone troopers. So as it turned out, the stormtroopers weren't in fact just enlisted men, they're the clones of the bounty hunter Jango Fett. Someone seriously thought it would be a good idea to make clones out of a notorious murderer, assassin, and bounty hunter and produce them by the tens if not hundreds of thousands. But look, I won't go into detail about what I hated about that film. I could talk about that until I bled from my asshole.
Well, we won't be seeing him again.
I guess the point I'm getting to is that like the Phantom Menace before it, Attack of the Clones got the old video game treatment, and we got numerous games inspired by the events in the films. In 2005, we got the release of Star Wars Republic Commando, which isn't a tie-in with the film directly, but does follow the escapades of the legendary Delta Squad of clone commandos, who undertake various missions for the Republic around the same time as the events of the second and third film. Developed by LucasArts, it's a first-person shooter with a basic squad command system, borrowing heavily from environments and characters in the prequel films. You see the game through the eyes of Delta 38 and assign orders to your three squadmates, Delta 62, 40, and Delta 7. They're all essentially the same person in terms of their skills and abilities, though they've got unique coloured armour and individual voice actors to differentiate them. I'm not sure why some of them have got American accents when it was established that all of the clone troopers are clones of Jango Fett, but I guess they had to do that so you don't get confused as to who's talking.
You hear that, Sev? Someone thinks I'm excellent.
Well, at least that makes two of you.
Delta Squad is armed with the DC-17 interchangeable weapon system, which sounds more complicated than it really is. It's just your standard laser rifle with alternate fire modes. The basic mode is a repeating laser, but you've also got a high-powered sniper mode, complete with a 10 and 20 times magnification scope, and later on you get an explosive mode, useful for heavier targets. Each mission also has unique weapons that can be scavenged from the ground, and lastly, as a final resort, you've also got a very basic pistol with infinite ammo that has to recharge its energy over time. Now look, the shooting isn't amazing to be honest, mostly because none of the weapons feel all that impactful, and even the weaker enemy types require a bit of pummeling before going down. If you're out of ammo for everything but the pistol, you're quite often in a very bad spot, and there can be lengthy sections when that piece of shit is all you've got to use. The game uses that Halo style of crosshair where it's really just a huge circle in the middle of the screen that doesn't really indicate where the hell you're actually firing. There's a few points in the campaign when you're flying solo, and these are the moments which highlight how dull the shooting really is. In terms of the presentation, the game looks pretty decent for its time, with some great modelling for the various members of Delta Squad, and some great looking particles with the explosions and other weapon effects, combined with snippets of John Williams' soundtrack and some new compositions by a guy named Jesse Harlan. It runs on the Unreal 2 engine, though I couldn't even really tell until I looked it up, and whilst it doesn't support widescreen resolutions, it still gets the job done. Now, the game itself is basically split up into 3 missions, all of which have lots of small side objectives, and all of these will roughly take you 1 to 2 hours to complete each. Yeah, it's a short game. The opening mission takes place on Geonosis, followed by a mission on an abandoned, derelict Federation ship, before the final mission which takes place on the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk. Enemies you come up against are either Geonosians, Trandoshans, and the battle-hardened droids of the Trade Federation. As the leader of Delta Squad, it's up to you to guide your men through each gunfight and make sure you're making the best use of their combat skills. Every single order you give your teammates can be done by simply aiming at something and pressing F on the PC version by default. Now this could be taking up a sniping position, hopping on a turret, hacking into a computer system, or stacking up to breach a room.
Clear. Grenade thrown!
You can also keep your team in an offensive stance, which means they will actively seek out enemies, or a more defensive stance where they'll simply follow closely behind you and attack only when you do. You can also direct them to a specific area or cancel all of their current orders and recall them back to you. Their health is indicated by the colour of their respective icon, and you have to tell them when to heal as well, at the many Bacta stations throughout each level. I guess if there was a command to tell them to wipe their own arse, you could do that as well. When you move into a new area, you can see all the vantage points and strategical positions set up for you, and it can be quite satisfying handing out orders on the fly and overcoming some of the game's bigger battle sequences. And yet this whole tactical system is both the game's biggest strength and also its biggest weakness, and this stems from the often polarizing teammate AI. Most of the time, if you tell them to do something, they'll do it. They're good at hacking into computers and opening doors without too much of a fuss. But there are times when they just seem to ignore your input, or take so goddamn long to even get to where they need to be, that it kinda defeats the purpose of making these quick on-the-fly decisions in the first place. It's like if I tell one of them to hop on a turret or get to that sniping position, I'd like there to be a sort of sense of urgency instead of them just kinda lollygagging around. One of the most common occurrences and examples of their often slow reaction time is when you're taking on any of the heavier enemy types. These are enemies with much more health points than your standard enemy, and you're supposed to order all of your squad to focus fire on these guys to help take them out faster. And yet half the time, even when you've assigned a priority to these targets, your squad will just kinda stand there doing nothing. Perhaps not even firing at all, leaving you to do all the work yourself. Now, if your success on taking out a strong enemy type like this comes down to the entire team working together, and 2 out of your 3 squad mates aren't even in the fight, then you've got a pretty big problem on your hands. More so because these heavy enemy types can incapacitate you and your squad mates in a matter of seconds. There's an enemy called a Geonosian Elite that fires this high-powered kinda laser which can knock someone out near instantly. Time and time again, you can expect to see your fellow Delta Squad buddies melted by these assholes as they just kinda stand there in the direct line of fire.
Squad leader down.
Thankfully, your teammates can be revived an unlimited amount of times, but you really don't want to be focusing on that when you've got a dozen combat droids firing at you. During certain combat sections, there is so much crap going on that the AI just seems to flip out, unsure what the hell it's supposed to do, and you're just fighting this large-scale battle by yourself, periodically pulling back to revive someone. And even outside of combat, there's basic navigation issues that arise quite commonly, like you may have ordered the squad to follow behind you, and then you turn around and see that they're dawdling around on the other side of the map. I mean, you shouldn't have to keep checking up on your allies to make sure they're doing what you told them to do. I often feel like I'm playing a different version of the game to everyone else, because anytime I ever hear people talk about it, all they ever do is sing high praise. But it's chock full of so many little minor problems and often flat out frustrating that I start to wonder if I'm like playing the game wrong or something. Look, when it all does come together, it's extremely enjoyable though. Some of the combat areas in this game are just humongous, with lots of options left up to your squad, and there's just dozens of fodder type enemies that your squad really does annihilate when they all work together. You get these moments where, you send one guy to destroy a droid spawner while the other one hops on a turret, all whilst that very John Williams sounding score cascades in the background. It is incredibly awesome stuff.
Fire in the hole.
It is definitely a challenging game, though a lot of that challenge comes from those moments when you have to spend more time worrying about your squad mates and making sure they're not off somewhere staring at a wall than actually handing out orders and killing things together. I will say one thing the game does quite well though is how it integrates all these mechanics into your heads-up display. Your viewpoint is obviously through the helmet of Delta 38, but all of the information you need is always right there on the screen. Your shield, your health, and the positions of your squad mates are all seamlessly integrated into the display. Ammo for each weapon is displayed on the weapon itself, also freeing up lots of space on the screen. And in a really cool touch, whenever you kill something up close and get its innards across your visor, this very neat looking wiping mechanism goes across the screen to clean everything up. There's a lot of cool ideas like this here and there, and when it works well, but there's just so many minor irritations with the bullet sponge enemies, the lackluster and underpowered weapons, and these AI problems with your teammates that affect the game quite fundamentally.
Squad leader down.
I don't want to sound like I'm just heaping shit on this game, and I did like a lot of stuff it had to offer. I like the cheesiness of the dialogue, I like the music, I like the sound effects, and I like how there's not a single lightsaber to be seen. I realise that this is a 10-year-old game and all that, and I can also understand that nostalgia plays a pretty big part in how a lot of people feel about this. I get it. This is one title I would think would really benefit from a sequel, because the updated technology possible for the AI would make the gameplay much more seamless and hassle-free. We've been kind of spoiled with Star Wars based first-person shooters. I mean, look at the whole Dark Forces franchise. And while Republic Commando doesn't really hold a candle to those games, nor does it really seem to want to, it is still a pretty decent shooting game, even with all these issues.
Good job, mate.
Would I recommend it though? Look, probably not, only because it's very much a product of its time, and it hasn't aged all that gracefully. Also, it's not very rich on Star Wars lore and doesn't really add anything new to the series. I mean, it's just about a bunch of clone troopers blowing stuff up, and there's no real sense of character development or anything like that along the way. It's a little bit hard to get attached to a character whose name is a serial number. However, if you've ever wanted to be inside the helmet of a clone commando, fight alongside Wookiees and blow shit up, then this is about as good as it gets. At least until someone executes Order 66.
It was a pleasure.
That was a lot more intense than the simulations.